Hey there, welcome to Leading Change Conversations, the podcast where we tackle real-life challenges with leaders like you to make organizational change a breeze. In this episode, we'll speak about managing our emotions and those of others through change. This is particularly interesting because it empowers us to navigate uncertainty with greater emotional intelligence while enhancing personal growth and resilience. So I'm your host. I'm Ulrike Saminati, and I train, coach, and inspire leaders to turn into successful change agents, to communicate with impact, and to lead with authenticity. And today I have an amazing guest, Desi Jagger. Desi is a certified leadership coach. She helps leaders to sustain peak performance in times of complex change, such as post-merger integration and organizational restructuring. She does this through team and one-on-one coaching, equipping leaders with the right mindset and tools to bring out the best in themselves and others. Welcome, Desi.
It's lovely to be here, Ulrike.
Yeah, we will have a very interesting topic today, in my opinion, because everything starts with our emotions. You know, every action we take is triggered by emotions. Every action others take is triggered by their emotions. And yet, I think in the business world, especially, it's one of these topics where we try to not look into too much, because we try to be factual and very rational. And I think especially in change, this is probably something we miss out on a lot, because in change, especially when we have some bad news in our eyes as a leader, we have an emotion for sure. And sometimes this emotion is very, very strong. And then we are supposed to manage others in a factual way, in a very professional way. And for many people, this turns out to be super, super difficult, actually. What is your view on this, just to have a little introduction on the topic from your side?
Yeah, this is spot on. So I think a lot of times senior leaders and especially executive leaders feel the pressure to be perfect, be the perfect role model, to have everything prepared, including adequate reactions to situations, to have all the answers. And this pressure comes, I would say, a lot internally from the leader themselves. Of course, it also comes from the organization as people look up to the leaders and expect them to be behaving and being in a certain way. But you're absolutely right that this pressure can be significant, especially when things change. And actually, these leaders are also very human. So one of the privileges of my job and my partner's job in coaching, especially one-on-one, is seeing that vulnerability and that realness of these very senior leaders, which very infrequently gets shown to the outside world. But I can assure you it exists because they are also just human.
Yeah, exactly. And often the bad news change, let's call it like that. Sometimes this is a merger, actually, because then people fear that their job is doubled up and then they're not necessary anymore. They will lose their roles. This might happen in mergers or any other kind of restructuring processes that people get announced. Then very often they see a leader on stage in a town hall, for example, telling them very self-assured why we have to do that and giving them the good business reasons why. And often people have then actually that feeling that this person doesn't care, because usually the leader does not show any emotions, does not show that for me it's also not easy to go through that, or it was maybe not an easy decision, admitting these kind of things, that there's also a feeling of, whoa, this is really a difficult phase. We all go together through it, me including. And often I don't hear that. I see very often still the old style, where people just show off like, I have it all in hand, I have it under control, we know why we have taken this decision, and now you just have to understand it. And once you understood, I presume that you will act accordingly, and you all go back to work, 100% productivity as before, and we just continue. And I think that doesn't work anymore, because people are in a shock phase. Maybe the leader himself or herself is in a shock phase still in that moment. Sometimes depends on how long this change has been prepared before, obviously. But we completely underestimate actually the emotional area.
Yeah, and I think that links back to the pressure. So in the cases where, for example, let's say in a merger and acquisition, and when it's a very senior announcement, often the first announcement that gets made to the organization at the same time as it gets made to the wider public or shortly before. In some of those cases, these leaders have had a lot of time to process the emotions, to go through the change curve. Oftentimes, they have an awareness that, yes, they are staying in the organization or that they are leaving, but they have made peace with that. So they have gone through the change curve and through the journey, at least to some extent. And so they are, in that sense, a little bit more distanced from the people who are just hearing about the change. So in this case, it's a question of having empathy and having to remind themselves and ask themselves, where is the audience at? Right? My background is Procter & Gamble. We always focused on the who, on the consumer. In this case, the employees. So asking yourself, well, who am I talking to, and in which stage of the change curve are they? In the case of the announcement, they are in the status quo of the change curve, which is at the very, very beginning, and they're about to hit the shock stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's one case where this emotional distance might happen. In the other cases where things get announced to the leader and then the leader themselves need to share this information with their team or the rest of the organization very shortly after that, I think we need to acknowledge here that the leader themselves is probably in the shock phase. And the shock phase is characterized by getting information, processing it rationally, but this information hasn't sunk into the heart. So we don't quite understand and feel what it might mean for us and for the team. And so the shock response is a sort of protection of the mind and the body from going mad with potentially really bad news or really risky or dangerous news. I'm exaggerating a little bit here. We're talking in a corporate context, not life or death, but that's the shock phase. So in the case where the leader is announcing news to their team right after they find out, there's that element of they haven't figured it out yet. And adding to that, what we talked about just before, about the expectations of looking very professional. So that's kind of the other element. And the final element, I would say, is this fear of losing people. And the fear that the leader themselves, if they show panic, might disseminate this panic across the organization. It's a very valid fear. If someone announces something and they are, visibly very nervous and concerned, it's likely that this will catch on. So having said all of that, there's a very fine balance here between the term that I would use here is selective vulnerability, meaning how can I, as a leader, show some level of emotion and authenticity and concern so that people can relate to me as a human and I can relate to them. At the same time, being selective so that I don't overburden the team with additional concerns. I don't exaggerate potentially because of my own fear of the situation. And so, or maybe having a step-by-step approach of announcing things. So that's the balance there. And I think the term selective vulnerability is quite adequate in describing that.
Mm-hmm. Let me come back to that in a few minutes. I want to now go back to what you have said in like 2-3 minutes ago, because I think many people are not really aware of that. And that is the famous change curve. I mean, it's a model that exists in different variations, but overall, it's always the same principle that in the beginning of a change, you have that shock. That means you have strong emotions, strong negative emotions, shock, denial. then usually anger, then it lowers down. It's really a curve that starts very high, lowers down to frustration until depression, what they call depression. And then it goes up into exploration phase where people then, think about, okay, what could I do now in this new situation, until it comes to acceptance, or some curves it's called integration. And what you said before, I think is very important to understand. If it's something that has been prepared for months or for a year even by the senior leadership, and you're one of the senior leaders, you have gone through that whole curve from the beginning, and you're probably in the very end in a very high level, energetically, but in a positive thing. It means you're in the acceptance phase. And you bring people with the announcement into the shock level. So exactly the same high level of energy, but in the negative area, like, what? And I see so many people who think just because they have informed the others, they run through this curve in light speed, and they are there 1 hour later, or next day at least. Yeah? And they don't remember that they might have taken weeks, if not even months, to digest the news, depending on the size of the news and what this means for their proper personal or professional life. And I think this is so important to understand, that people can also, you can be in a very high energetic mode, in the negative or positive one, but other people can be in depression. They're very low on energy. They don't want to hear anything. They don't want to do anything. And that you just need to give people time sometimes also to go through that before you can come up with all the constructive proposals, or asking them for creating new ideas now for the future. Whereas because they are in a phase where they're just mentally absolutely not able to do that. And then you burden them really heavily, because then it becomes very, very stressful. And this is when people then really reject, sometimes go into burnout and stop everything, because it's just all too much. And I think as a leader, this is super important. Are you also working with that? I know that you're working with that, but how are you working with that with leaders? What would you recommend?
Yes, I'm having some conversations right now with leaders that are very relevant to this particular topic, where yes, they have been able to digest, they've had the time to digest the information and make their own decision whether they are staying or going from the organization. Now, some of the things that we look at together is, first of all, you mentioned it, right? Time. It takes time for the idea to sink in and for people to realize that this is actually happening. Some of the responses that we sometimes hear from the wider organization are things like, "Oh, they announced this last year and they didn't do anything about it," or "This happened before and it was very small and marginal." So there's a denial stage where people don't feel this is important, it doesn't matter, or it's not going to affect me, or my job is safe, it's fine, I'm good. Right? There's that phase, and closely linked with the shock, right, of the information. So we go between shock, oh my God, there's something, a huge change happening, to denial, oh, it's fine, doesn't matter. So this itself can go back and forth quite a bit. And so one of the things that myself and the team work with leaders on is consistency of message, right? When you announce a change, you need to decide how gradually you're going to announce it, what's going to be revealed when, but the consistency is important. So once you have gone a certain path, you need to stick to that path. One of the things that creates or takes away from credibility and creates a huge amount of stress is lack of consistency. Mm-hmm. And so it is better to say, this is the information that we know, and this is the information that we don't know. Mm-hmm. These are the things that are fixed for now, and these are the things that may be changing. And in that way, when leaders communicate in this way, they give us framework for people to use and to kind of use to navigate, and not start inventing gossip or stories, or just out of worry projecting things that might happen. So consistency is important. Providing a framework is important. Acknowledging the gaps or the imperfections is important. These things help with time, of course, giving time to people to digest. But these things help to structure the process for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that what admitting is even a too strong word for it, I think, but just also saying what we don't know yet is super important. I think we need to see it much more positively because the things we don't know yet, it's also the perfect occasion when you announce a change to ask all the people in your teams or in the whole organization for help. Yeah, for contribution, for coming up with ideas, because you might correct your trajectory a little bit. Because obviously, what people see from above is a bit the ivory tower view. But when you bring it then to other levels in the organization, people have a completely different view, and that can be very helpful to avoid a lot of mistakes that can be made throughout the process. And at the same time, you can create a lot of engagement, which again brings people into another emotional area because they can contribute and they don't feel totally, I don't know, powerless and like victims. They then can easier shift into a mode where I can say, hey, but I can do something about it. I can shape it a little bit in my little area. I can contribute to something. And that's much, much more positive. And I think it's all the total away from what might some leaders think is perfect, because they would say, when I have it under control and I have planned it out, and we go with that plan and we stick to that plan. Whereas this is a much more loose way of acting. And I don't know, there's a few profiles that are in high leadership positions have a hard time to accept this kind of, this way of doing things, because you have to stay flexible and open potentially for another outcome as well at the end. And it's not easy.
It's not at all easy. And again, it's combining the structure and the clarity with the flexibility and going with the flow. So one of the approaches that we use, for example, in team coaching is when you, as a leader or leadership team, help people to navigate the transition, you can share with them, these are the things that are decided and we're not going to take your input on.
Mm-hmm.
Then here are the things that are not decided and we're not going to take your input on. But here are the things where we are going to take your input, right? And so people can start to make peace with the fact that, no, they will not be consulted. You know, a brand manager may not be consulted in a massive multinational about the potential of selling part of the company. Maybe that's not part of their role. But they may have a say on how to integrate the teams in the post-merger integration or other factors like that. So you mentioned it here, victim mindset of I'm helpless, this is happening to me, I can do nothing about that, versus empowered mindset, which means, this is looking from the wider organization perspective, which means, all right, there are things out of my control, but there are things within my influence. What are these things? People will eventually find them because people are smart and they find their way. But as leaders, we can help them to already identify those things and say, here is where we invite you to focus,
Mm-hmm.
right? For example, team leaders focus on maintaining positive momentum in your team, giving clarity, listening to people, etc. So there can be guidance there as well on where can each level of the organization, where will they be consulted? And I think the final piece here that we use in the ORSC team coaching model is being clear with people that even when they are consulted, their opinion will be considered, but every single opinion may not be actioned.
Mm-hmm.
And designing that up front means that people are not disgruntled when, let's say that's a survey goes out or focus groups happen with team leaders in an organization. They will input, they have the opportunity to be heard, but making clear that we are not going to action every point from everything. We are going to take all of that input and consider it. So it's sphere of influence, not sphere of control. The more honest and transparent leaders are about this, the more people feel that, okay, this is the limits of, or this is the extent to which I can do things, and this is my role in this. And then they don't feel disappointed, they don't feel disgruntled, they don't feel ignored. In fact, they focus on the fact that they have contributed, they have done their best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a great way to move forward with this change project. And to really bring people on board, but in a way that it's clear that, you cannot take action on everything, because sometimes the proposals of employees are contradictory. So you can't do both, obviously. But I know that people, from focus groups or surveys, for example, there's always a very high attention that something must happen afterwards. And indeed, something must happen, but not on every single aspect, on every single answer that people gave, because it's just not possible. But I have experienced in my corporate career as well that this level of expectations is often very, very high among employees. And so sometimes CEOs I worked with didn't want to do any surveys anymore, because they said, we can only fail because we can never actually follow up enough. And this is just because what you said, because they lacked to communicate in advance, to do this expectation management, that we will listen to you all. We will really look into this very seriously, take everything into consideration, but we will act only upon some proposals, because not all proposals can materialize, because they might be contradictory, for example. So I think that's it's a very interesting point. And emotionally, this brings people, again, into a completely different area, like you say, out of victim mode into a doer mode, where people can contribute and feel like, I'm empowered here. I'm someone. I'm considered. I'm listened to. I exist. Let me go back now to what you said earlier on about selective vulnerability, which is an expression I like very much, because vulnerability is one of these terms. We hear it very often over the past, I would say maybe 10 years. It came up very strongly that it's important to be vulnerable as a leader. And for many leaders, this is not really clear. What does that mean? I hear sometimes leaders say, does it mean I have to cry in front of my employees? And say, no, for sure not. I mean, if you want to, but no, that's not the point. The point is that you don't have to show the strong person, the perfect leader who has it all under control all the time, because that's emotionally draining and it's not authentic. And people today, they crave for authenticity. They want to see the human. They want to see the human in their boss and not just the professional, because people follow people, human beings, and not leaders, which are just professional leaders and nothing else. Let's call it like that. So what you say about selective vulnerability is very important. I think it has a lot to do, maybe you can speak about that a bit as well, the level of seniority. Because the more senior you are, the more difficult often it is to suddenly show vulnerability, because for the past 20 years, you have not done that. It was just not something you were used to do. That's one thing. But also when you're a very young leader, for example, to show too much vulnerability is often very quickly seen as, not professional enough, not confident enough. So you have to be more careful then as well. Whereas in a senior leader show a little bit of vulnerability, it's often like, wow, they have said that. That was really great. And people love that very, very much. Whereas when you're very junior, it comes across very differently. What do you see? What's your recommendation for leaders of different levels, how they apply selective vulnerability?
It's a fantastic observation. There are some biases. There is there might be the age bias, the gender bias also, as well, without derailing the conversation and going into that. My observation is the following. More junior people look up to senior people and feel that they are fully in control and that they have it all sorted and it's easy for them because they get to make decisions and they have authority and they have budgets and so they're in a good place, in an easy place. Top senior leaders look down and think, well, the rest of the organization has it easy. They don't have to make the tough calls. They don't have to role model as much. They don't have to take as much risk. So it's easy for them. So wherever you are, it is very easy to look to the other side and think their job is much easier, or they can show more vulnerability and that be and be okay with that, right? So there's a bit of a illusion here. That the other side is easier, not greener. What I would say is selective vulnerability and some level of vulnerability is important for human connection, which means it needs to be both ways. A lot of people feel uncomfortable with vulnerability. I can absolutely understand why. And so how we work with our clients when they are reluctant to display vulnerability is starting small. There is one model that I really like called the 7 Levels of Intimacy by Matthew Kelly. It's a great book. And essentially, it gives a pyramid of how intimate or close in any relation, business, work, home, etc., we get with people, and what are steps that we can do to increase that intimacy, that closeness. Every relationship will begin with very generic things like hello, how are you, and how is the weather. These are very surface things. And then if we choose to make it so, you might start exchanging opinions, which is a little bit more vulnerable. You're exposing yourself to criticism, to judgment, bias, etc. Then sharing hopes and fears. That's another deeper level of intimacy. And then the last level of intimacy is sharing legitimate needs. This is what I need from you in this relationship, right? Boundaries, other requirements, etc. And so I wouldn't go through all 7 of them, but that's a kind of escalation of levels of intimacy. And so when we practice vulnerability, we can take that model and think, okay, where are most of our interactions, right? So as a team leader, where is most of my interaction with maybe each individual is different, or with a team? Are our conversations generic, or have we talked about our personal fears, hopes, dreams, etc., escalating down? A good approach is to begin where you are and try to go into the next step.
Mhm.
When you are only exchanged very surface things with people, it's difficult to then suddenly share your legitimate need or hopes and dreams, etc. That's quite a jump, right? So you can gradually increase that and then wait for that from the other side. This is not a one-way street. So that's one useful model. If we think about leaders announcing big changes in a corporate setting, an organizational setting, yes, in that moment, they need to show some level of vulnerability in order to be authentic. So again, thinking where are you and what can you say which will connect. So for example, maybe in the beginning when they learned about this, they had some concerns and then they were appeased. Maybe they can share a hope or a dream about this new organizational restructuring. My dream is that this is how the organization turns out. That is very different than the company vision is, right? Even sharing, my fear or one potential fear is that people don't engage, that you guys don't engage, and that, we as a leadership team have to push everything, and it's a struggle. And therefore, the dream is that we can engage in whatever ways, even though you are feeling uncertain and shocked right now. So there are ways of weaving in these things without them being sweeping statements like, I believe that this organizational restructure is the end of the world or the end of the company or the end of my career. There's no need to talk like that. But we can look at the 7 levels of intimacy and try to push ourselves to cross the next step.
I think that's a really good framework, actually, because even if you go into very formal situations, such as a town hall meeting, you can think of, in which level was I last time? Did I share any opinions, actually, or did I just share facts? If I have only shared pure facts, not even any kind of personal opinion, then it's maybe just this very first, very small step, actually, which doesn't feel like vulnerability, most likely, but it is already, because like you say, you show something of yourself. Or if you're in that stage already, then, like you say, sharing some hopes and fears. Let's speak about the example when somebody got the news only the day before, for example, and they heard it, or a few hours before they have to then, as a group, stand in front of the people because it's announced in a town hall. You might be a level -2 leader, and you have heard now you have a big team of 40 people. You have heard, oh my God, there will be a whole restructuring. Most likely half the people in your team will relocate or lose their jobs. So it's quite a big deal. It will be a shock for the organization. And you heard it like a few hours before. Maybe you had a night to sleep over it, which is already luxury sometimes. And then, they will announce it. I will also sit in the audience as a leader, but I know that my whole team will come to me after that town hall and bombard me with questions. And then obviously, I think people often try immediately to prepare content-wise in a way, whereas they have not prepared themselves emotionally if they had a few hours. What would you say when you have that situation? Is there a process that you can also help or give people to get through this very short phase to prepare themselves, emotionally especially?
So here, this is quite a tricky situation, but not an unusual one. And rather than thinking of a process or trying to get full clarity for yourself in a few hours, because remember that person is going to be in the shock or denial stage themselves. So trying to figure out things may not be the most productive or even realistic thing. And so here, the skill that we hone in with clients in team coaching and one-on-one coaching is tolerating ambiguity or embracing uncertainty, being with uncertainty. I just heard about this. I don't know how I feel. I don't know what's going to happen. I need to face all of these people. I don't have time to prepare, even to know what's happening. But the key thing in these moments is this is a moment of uncertainty. And now we're going to be with the uncertainty for some time, for a few days, for a few weeks, for whatever it is. And then focusing on that as a concept, so embracing uncertainty, is probably the most effective thing that this leader can do in that moment, because they are in the uncertainty themselves. The other thing that we really focus on in the coaching is building resilience and building in the expectation that the change curve is going to happen again and again and again. And so building in that capacity, that resilience to shock, doesn't mean that the leader is not shocked at the news, but it means that very quickly they remind themselves, this is normal. This will happen again and again. And so that's the element. So normalizing shock and normalizing change and normalizing that, and being with uncertainty. Those are the two things I find more helpful and more authentic. How would that translate? Well, with the team, I'm in the same boat as you. I just heard this, and now this is a situation of uncertainty, and we need to be with it for some time. The situation is uncomfortable. We don't know. We don't even know what we don't know. But this is an opportunity for us to practice our muscle of getting comfortable with uncertainty.
And I think that's a wonderful last word, Desi. Thank you very much for all your insights which you gave today.
Thank you, Ulrike.
And thanks to the audience for tuning into Leading Change Conversations today. So if you want to improve your own skills on leading change or communicating more effectively, you can check out my courses for individuals on my website. I propose a bunch of useful 90 minutes live online classes around overcoming procrastination, surmounting change resistance, communicating with impact, or influencing through presence. And until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and making a difference.